Happy Wednesday. Happy August 7th for those of you who celebrate whatever it may be on August 7th. Maybe it's the prototypical hump day. Maybe today's your birthday. Maybe it's your first day back at school. I don't know. But welcome in to another episode of the In Touch with Indiana Sports podcast, powered by HoosierIllustrated.com. Welcome in. Happy to have you with us as always. If you've stuck around through these first few episodes, this is the 7th episode on August 7th, and we're ready to get rolling here today on a Wednesday, a hump day edition, as is the old cliche. And somebody in the YouTube comment section, shout out to Jesse, he said this the other day, we had hump day in the 70s. Last week I tried to explain that I thought hump day really got popularized, or maybe it was repopularized, at least saying it, after that silly Geico commercial with the camel walking around the office. So thanks to Jesse for letting me know that it's been around a lot longer than I realized. Goes to show my age and the, my lack of culture awareness, whatever you want to call that. But either way, welcome in, and man, turn down the heat, turn it down. I'm sick of summer. And I don't dislike summer and what all comes with it when it comes to, vacations and traveling and all that good stuff. But you know what? We're past all that. It's August. We are officially in midsummer. And I know a lot of people, specifically, I know I referenced school teachers earlier, but this is technically the end of your summer. So like you're going back to school. If you're a student, you're going back to class, whatever it may be. So like, the heat, there's no reason for it to be here anymore. But nonetheless, we still have another month and a half of the official season of summer before things really kind of taper off in regards to the heat. So I'm sick of it. You're probably going to hear me complain about it until we get out of the summer heat, because I don't like it the way that I like other seasons. If I'm ranking the seasons, spring and fall are tied for first, depending on what kind of mood I'm in. If I'm in the mood to kind of just sit around, have a campfire, maybe go out and start some yard work or something like that. Maybe I'm more of a spring guy at that point. But if I'm ready for football season, or I'm ready for really any major sport to come back into the forefront, then I'm maybe a more fan of the fall, or autumn, as some people call it. So bring on either of those two seasons. I'm ready for fall. I'm also a big concert guy, as I talked about the Creed show last week. There's a festival where I live called the Louder Than Life Festival that I attend every September, the end of September, with my brother and some buddies of ours. And that's also something I look forward to every year. And man, I hope to have some stories to share from that whenever that comes around here in about a month and a half. So I'm ready for fall weather. I'm sick of cutting the grass in the heat. And again, cutting the grass or mowing the lawn, depending on where you're located, I guess, is it's something I enjoy doing when it's not this, when you don't walk outside and it feels like you just stepped out of the shower, and that doesn't make any sense, right? But when you live in an area that is known for its high amount of humidity, that's what it feels like. It's sticky, it's gross, and you really just don't want to have anything to do with it. A couple of years ago, we had some air conditioning problems, and that made it that much worse. Thankfully, we got a fairly new, it's only a year old unit now, but hey, we're getting through the summer, and we are only a few weeks away to college football, week 0. Week 0 actually falls on my birthday this year. The week 0 games, I should say, August 24th. So that's a nice little, if you want to call it a birthday gift. I know they didn't do it for me. That would be very weird if college football, if the people who create the schedule at ESPN or Fox Sports or whatever were like, you know what? That guy John over on In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by HoosierIllustrated.com, we've got to make week 0. We got to put it on his birthday this year, because he has been fiending for college football, and he's ready for it. He can't take it anymore. So we've got to put it on his birthday. And I think that's pretty much what happened whenever they put the meeting together for when they were going to start, or unofficially start, I guess. I know it's official. Week 0 is kind of a weird name because it's technically a part of week 1. It's really just an extended week 1. Week 1 really goes on for 2 weeks. They just call it week 0. But that's where we're at. And I'm excited. We're very close to college football and the rest of the college sports slate kicking off. One other thing that I've been asked to do this year, and I'm curious, those of you who listen or watch to the show, what you think I should do, because I've never done fantasy football ever. And I know it's been around for ages. But I had a relative of mine, my stepbrother, he reached out a few days ago and said, "Hey, do you want to do fantasy football with us this year?" And I hesitated. I still haven't said yes, and that's why I'm asking for your advice, because I'm the kind of person, I know fantasy football is a great way to pay attention to teams and players that maybe you otherwise wouldn't pay attention to with the NFL. But I also know it takes, like, it can be very time consuming. And I know, like, you can do it and just not care, but I'm the kind of person, if I do fantasy football, I want to be all in. I don't want to just sign up and, here's my team, and then I don't look at it for the entirety of the season. So I want to hear from you, whether that be in the YouTube comments or you can hit that hotline 502-830-9195 and let me know, should I participate in fantasy football this year? And tell me why, not just a yes or a no. I need to know why it would benefit me or if it would be a waste of my time, because I'd love to give it a try, but I also don't want to do it just if it's going to be a waste. If you know me at all, which again, maybe you don't know me. If you've just discovered me through this video podcast that I do here on Hoosier Illustrated, then you probably don't know me very well. So yeah, and the other reason that I don't really know if I would be interested in doing it, because I do sports betting, as I mentioned before. And so that's kind of my extra incentive to pay attention to other games in the NFL, college football, NBA, college basketball, whatever it may be. I feel like a lot of people, like, that's what I keep wanting to call it, Final Fantasy. That's the inner video game nerd coming out of me. I keep thinking Final Fantasy, but my brain thankfully turns me around and says it's fantasy football, not Final Fantasy. So yeah, just took that off the rails a little bit. So, and that's why I tend to think maybe I don't want to do fantasy football. But yeah, please weigh in. Let me know if you think I should do it or not. And again, you don't have to hit the hotline. You could leave a YouTube comment. You don't have to do either one. I just prefer that if you do. But again, that hotline number, if you do want to tell me why in a more detailed fashion, is 502-830-9195. All right. Good show in store for you today. I hope. We've got my buddy and podcast co-host, I should say, on the Out of Touch podcast, Dustin Schutte, coming on today to talk a little Big Ten football, Indiana, Purdue, and the like. And he covers football and really college sports all around for Sports Illustrated, one of their publications. And I'm excited to have him on for the first time today. And it was a great conversation. I look forward to sharing it with you guys here momentarily. But before that, a couple of things I want to hit on. Fall camp continues for Indiana football. And there's a couple of things of note that were mentioned in the presser earlier this week. And I'm not going to play any direct sound bites. I'll just mention a few points that were made. And I know for those of you who may have already watched the presser, there was a certain reporter who has been clowned in the past. And I don't want to be this early on in my career. And I'm not really this kind of person anyway. I'll do it when it's necessary, but I'd like to avoid being the kind of guy who bashes another person in the media because they make a gaffe. I understand that there are times where it needs to be addressed, like when this specific person had the Caitlin Clark situation. I think by even mentioning that, if you're familiar, you probably know who and what I'm talking about. But the same reporter kind of did something similar to Curt Cignetti, or whenever he was speaking to Curt Cignetti. And it's just very cringy is really all it is. And hopefully that kind of stuff stops. And that's all I'll say on the matter of that. Hopefully. But in terms of actual stuff that was mentioned from Curt Cignetti, a couple things. D'Angelo Pons, one of the highest rated transfers that Indiana brought in, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Apparently, this dude hasn't been beat on a pass route in practice. And I know it's practice. We talking about practice, the old cliche, right? From Allen Iverson. But if this guy's as good as he says he's being built up to be, and the offense is also as good as that's supposed to be built up to be, then that's probably a good sign that this D'Angelo Pons fella is going to be a pretty high impact player for the Hoosiers this year. So that's something good. One thing he also mentioned, he doesn't use a clock in practice, mainly just because he says it interrupts the flow, but also because it doesn't allow the players to be glued on the clock. It kind of gets them in the habit of not worrying about it and just focusing on the play and executing and that type of stuff. So that seems like it's a positive thing. Someone asked about kick returns, which is something you don't really think about a lot. I guess it's the special teams can sometimes be an afterthought, because here's the thing with special teams, if it's going well, there's really no reason to talk about it. If it's going bad, it can be detrimental to what's going on, I feel like. So then it becomes a major talking point. But he mentioned that Keyshawn Williams, Miles Price, and Van Horst will probably be Indiana's primary kick and punt returners this year, and that he expects them to do some good stuff. But he also emphasized that only about 30% of kickoffs are even returned this day and age, which it's interesting to think about, because as the years have gone on, there have been a lot of extra protections put on during kickoffs that tend to limit the amount of kickoffs that end up being returned for a decent amount. So it definitely feels like more often than not, one of two things happen on a kickoff return. Either it just gets kneed and you could take it out to the 25, or someone returns it for a touchdown. It feels like it's always one of those two things. So hopefully Indiana is they don't have to be the best, but hopefully they're acceptable or proficient in that category. And I guess that's kind of where we'll leave it off with the Cignetti stuff, because I don't want to get into to bashing Greg Doyle or any of that stuff. So let's see what else. The college football coaches poll was released on the other day. And you've got 6 Big Ten teams, 4 of them from the traditional Big Ten, 2 of them from the expanded Big Ten that includes the teams from the West Coast. You've got number 2, Ohio State, number 3, Oregon, number 8, Michigan, number 9, Penn State, number 23, USC, and number 25, Iowa, rounding out the top 25 for Big Ten teams in the initial coaches poll. And I know the other day I talked about not being a fan of preseason watch lists, and this kind of falls into that category as well. It does give you a nice, I guess, kind of, it's not really a bar, but it's just a starting point of where to expect teams to be. And ultimately with the coaches poll, and then even when the AP poll, when that gets released here soon, I believe that'll come out next week. But both of these polls don't even matter, because once we get to, I believe it's week 10 in the college football season, maybe it'll be different this year with the expanded playoff, but that's when the college football playoff rankings get released. And then the coaches and AP polls become completely unnecessary for the rest of the season. And I know they still put them out there, but they literally do nothing for where you end up landing in the postseason. And so really for the first 2/3 of the college football season, you're going off of rankings that have little to no impact. And I hate to say little to no impact, because I'm sure the college football playoff committee does reference these 2 rankings when they're putting their initial CFP rankings together. But it is interesting that we don't get a CFP ranking all year long, and we have to just go off these 2 coaches and AP polls that end up becoming unnecessary. But I also do like the fact that, like, the college football playoff committee, I guess, realizes that, like, we really don't know a lot about these teams until we get further into the season to really create a ranking. And what I wish they would do is, like, they don't need to put out a preseason poll, but I wish that they would start putting their rankings out by, instead of waiting till, I think it's, like I said, week 10, and I could be wrong about the exact week that they first come out, but maybe do it after week 4 or 5, because by then you're through your non-conference slate. Most schools are. I know, depending on which team you are and where your rivalries are set up and that type of thing, that can be adjusted a little bit. But by week 4 or 5, usually I think you have a pretty good idea of who's good and who's not. Maybe you don't know who the national, like, title favorite will be at that point, but by then you have a good idea of who some of the best are, and then the middle, and so on and so forth. So that's just my little spiel on the way they do the rankings in college football. But nonetheless, like I said, let's see who Indiana faces that's in this initial top 25. So they'll face Ohio State on the road, number 2 Ohio State. They do not face Oregon. They do not face Penn State. They'll have Michigan at home, and they will not face USC or Iowa. And others receiving votes, by the way, some Big Ten teams. Washington just outside the top 25 at number 26. Indiana will face them. Louisville at number 95. I know Indiana is not facing Louisville this year. They were on the schedule until they were replaced by Western Illinois, the FCS opponent. That's where they stand. Any other Big Ten teams? We'll see Wisconsin, number 17. Indiana does not face them. Kentucky, number 12. I know Indiana doesn't face them as well, but I always keep tabs on Louisville and Kentucky just because that's what I'm familiar with. It's where I'm from. I'm not a fan of either of those two teams. It's just what I've been surrounded with my entire life. Maryland receiving 5 votes. Nebraska receives 2 votes. And I believe that does it for Big Ten teams that receive any votes. And who else on it? We've got Colorado receiving 2 votes. I'm curious which 2 coaches put their teams in the top 25. I don't know if Deion Sanders is somebody who participates in this, but it wouldn't surprise me if somebody put Colorado from the Colorado staff. So there you have it with the coaches poll. So I wonder if Indiana will find their way into a poll this year. And again, it doesn't mean a whole lot, like I mentioned, but we haven't seen Indiana inside that top 25 since their 2-10 year, which is crazy. They were in the preseason top 25 going into that. And that just goes to show you, again, why these polls sometimes mean little to nothing for your team. So I guess we'll leave it at that when it comes to the college football rankings, preseason rankings, if you will. So I'm going to go ahead and take us into our segment with the one and only Dustin Schutte from Sports Illustrated. So without further ado, here we go. Welcome in to the show, Dustin Schutte. Joining me now from Sports Illustrated and one of my co-hosts on the Out of Touch podcast is the one, the only Dustin Schutte. Welcome into your In Touch with Indiana Sports debut, my friend.
I know it's going to take me a minute to get used to that title after being on Out of Touch for so long.
I know it's been fun to kind of mesh both of the worlds together. Last week I brought on Mitchell Page to have his In Touch debut, so I thought it would only be appropriate to find a way to bring you on here, talk a little Indiana, Purdue football, Big Ten, all that kind of stuff as we're getting closer to the season here in a few weeks.
Absolutely. I mean, there's all types of stuff to talk about now after media days and fall camps underway. So I'm excited. We're on the verge of college football season being back.
I know. And it seems like we're at the time of year where you want it so badly that it seems like I know it's not far away. We're officially less than 3 weeks from week 0 games kicking off, but it goes by so slowly. You've kind of seen the entire offseason play out. You've seen the rosters come together, and at this point, even the spring season. And so at this point, there's nothing left to do other than just wait for the games to happen. So I'm excited. I'll go ahead and I'll just start with Indiana. New era with Curt Cignetti. I just want to hear your kind of general thoughts on where you think he's going to take the program. Obviously, he seems to have raised expectations for Indiana without even having his teams play a single snap outside of something that was taken in the spring game, obviously. So where do you think expectations should lie for Indiana and Kirk Cignetti in year one?
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest thing is, especially in year one, just do you look better? Do you look like a better football team? There were times under Tom Allen when we thought that they would make strides. It was like kind of a one step forward, two steps back kind of situation at times in the last 2 years under his tenure. So I think Kirk Cignetti, I think the thing I really like about him is he brings, and Tom Allen had a lot of energy, but he brings a different kind of energy where it's like this is a no BS situation. Like, we're here to work. We want to be the best. We're not just here to go to bowl games. He kind of reminds me in that sense of Greg Schiano at Rutgers. If you ever hear Greg Schiano talk, he's not talking about going to bowl games or finishing fourth in the Big Ten. He's talking about winning a championship. And Kurt Cignetti has that same mindset. So I don't think this is going to be like the type of transformative year where Indiana is going to be like 9-3 or 10-2. They're still playing in the Big Ten. There's still a lot of tough competition. He's brought pretty much his entire staff. He's brought a lot of James Madison guys. We're going to see how that kind of translate from the group of five to Big Ten level football. I don't know that it will at a super high level, but I think that Indiana is going to be better. I think if they could get to like 4 or 5, maybe get to 6 wins, I think you're talking about a positive season. But I think the momentum is already there. I think people are buying into what he's selling. And the one thing that I've always thought that Indiana football needs is like, are you competitive? Mm-hmm. And 2019, 2020 at IU, even 2017, first couple years under Tom Allen, they were really super competitive. And there was not a lot of games where you just thought they don't have a chance. And unfortunately, that was the case the last 2 years. I think that you're going to see an Indiana team that every single week they're going to be in a football game. They're going to give you 4 quarters of really hard-fought football.
I heard you mention the 4 or 5 kind of being the baseline. I'll disagree with you a little bit. I do think the bare minimum needs to be postseason play. And it's not because and I understand where you're coming from and kind of saying like it's kind of a rebuild. It's the first year. But I do think in this new era of what you might even call power 2 football with any program in the Big Ten, in the SEC, just kind of having more resources than everybody. And with the personnel that Kurt Cignetti's been able to bring in, and really what he was able to retain the production from what was good from last year's staff as well, I just don't think that there's any excuse to not at least find that 6-6 mark. And plus, you have that favorable schedule. You have 8 home games, especially in that first half of the year. If you can get past the UCLA game on the road in week 3, this might sound ridiculous, but there truly is a road where you could, in theory, and this means things totally work out in your favor, which means that does never happen, obviously. So I'm not trying to say that it will. But if you get past UCLA in week 3, there is a path for you to find bowl eligibility very, very early on in the season before things really ramp up in the back half of that schedule. So, again, a lot of dominoes have to fall in the Hoosiers' favor. And we'll have to wait and see what happens. We won't learn a lot about this team when they face off against FIU and Western Illinois in the first couple of weeks, but we'll really get a sense of where this team might be heading whenever they travel to the West Coast for their first Big Ten matchup.
And I think the biggest sin associated, and every school does this, every fan base does it, but potentially the biggest sin with every with Indiana football is like counting the wins. Right.
Yeah.
So, but when you bring
finding
up
the best path, the path of least resistance.
But okay, so this is just what I'm going to say because some of your listeners may know Shannon Griffith, who's been, he's helped cover the program. He coached at Manchester when I was at Manchester. Really good guy. We were talking, and he said, you get through that UCLA game, you've got a path to being 6-0 by the time you play Nebraska. I think it's 6-0 by the time you play Nebraska.
Yeah, because you have after UCLA, you have Charlotte, Maryland at home, and Northwestern on the road. Those are your
Maryland,
first 6 games.
I think Maryland's going to be a good football team, but they don't have Talia Tagovailoa anymore. They lost some key pieces on their offense. Northwestern, they were 8-5, a really big surprise last season, but what did they lose? They didn't bring in a great recruiting class. I don't think they brought in a ton of transfers, so I don't know, they might take a step back. So it's really interesting. You could see a situation where maybe Indiana could be anywhere from 3-3 to 6-0, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I'll say this too. I do think there's, and this doesn't play well in Kurt Cignetti's favor. I think he's managed to raise the expectation bar so high without doing anything that if he doesn't at least find a way to the postseason, I think the impatience level from fans will come a lot earlier than it would for maybe a previous coaching staff. And that's kind of the precedent he's laid out for himself. And I'm sure that he doesn't mind having that extra bit of pressure, considering he's won everywhere he's been.
Yeah.
But it is interesting to think that, because of what he's already done, that he kind of has to deliver in some way, shape, or form in his first season.
Yeah, and I think I mean, that's who he is. And I thought one of the really interesting things, I think it was from Monday's press conference, was, he was asked kind of a silly question, like, where's your energy level? It seems like, as my dog Biscuit makes a guest appearance here. But he was asked, like, it seems like you have low energy. Like, you talked about this being the entertainment business. And he was like, yeah, I did. But right now is the time to focus on football. We're focused on getting better. So he understands, like, yes, this is entertainment, but that's for like media days and spring ball. Not right now. Right now we're focused on winning. We're focused on getting better. And I think that this isn't just like a traveling circus or a sideshow. Like, he means business. And I think that that's what gives Indiana fans a lot of hope. Like, this isn't just a guy speaking a big game. When it comes time to, roll out the pads, roll out the football, he wants to get better. He wants Indiana to be at the top of the Big Ten. So I think that's where a lot of that faith comes from now.
Let's transition over to West Lafayette and the Purdue Boilermakers with second-year head coach Ryan Walters. I know their expectations, I would say they are to be improved upon what happened last season, but overall, when it comes to with them and the rest of the Big Ten, I'd still think they're not expected to necessarily be much improved in regards to their standing. That doesn't mean that there isn't a path to bowl eligibility necessarily, but what are kind of your early thoughts on what Ryan Walters can do with this Purdue team in year 2?
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting about that situation is everybody knows they've been picked to finish dead last in the Big Ten this year. I'm sure a lot of your listeners are probably smirking about that, right? And so, but they have they put that chip on their shoulder. And you can kind of feel it through practice, through the media availability. Like, they are also, there's not a lot of talk. Like, they have taken that very seriously. At one point, somebody asked Ryan if there was a mantra or like a slogan for the team this year, and he said, "Yeah, there is, but we're going to keep that in house. I don't want to make any of you guys mad," which makes me think that he's taking that 18th pick by the media very personally. I think, much like I said with Indiana, I think that when you look at Purdue's schedule, they got to play Notre Dame, they got to play Penn State, Ohio State, Oregon, 4 teams that are ranked in the coaches poll top 10.
They really only have one gimme because they play 11. Now, I guess Oregon State technically isn't a part of the power conferences anymore, but they are a power program historically. So it's definitely not an easy schedule for Purdue.
So I think there's a chance that they look a lot better and they are a much better football team. And in any other year, this would be a team headed to a bowl game. But because that schedule is so daunting and you really don't have a break from anybody, because you're right. You play Oregon State and you play Notre Dame in week 3. You play Oregon State week 4. Nebraska's going to be better. Northwestern, like I said earlier, we don't know what they're going to be like. Michigan State's got a completely new regime. Like, Indiana's probably gotten better. There are just no breaks for Purdue. So could this be a team that finishes 4-8, but is like light years ahead of where they were last season? Absolutely. I tend to think they'll get to the 5 or 6 wins just because of what we've seen. I think the offense is going to be better. They've added some key pieces from Georgia. There's a lot of rave about the wide receiver room, what they've done defensively. So we'll see. They lost some really good pieces in Deion Burks and Nick Scorton to the transfer portal. They got to replace a lot of production, but they also have a lot of talent coming back. So this is, like, as much as we praise the basketball in the state of Indiana, there's a lot of really interesting stuff happening on the football field between those two programs this year, Purdue and Indiana.
And it stinks that both of these programs were picked 17th and 18th out of the entire Big Ten.
Right?
I do
Yeah.
think there's a lot of just kind of, I don't want to say bias, but it's just people when any of these preseason polls come out, they're not really looking at anything other than who they think is going to be at the top, and everyone that comes below that is just,
Yep.
oh, where do they normally finish? And that's
Sure.
kind of why I think where you saw Indiana and Purdue finish at the bottom of these preseason lists, because it wouldn't surprise me if both of these teams finish somewhere in the middle of the pack. And if you were, and again, my opinion means little to nothing, but I'd be willing to bet UCLA finishes at the bottom of the Big Ten this year.
Yep.
I know they're used to, I think they have a really nice consecutive winning season streak going on, but the situation that UCLA is in, and he didn't help himself with the way, and I'm talking to Sean Foster now, the way that he kind of handled himself to introduce things at Big Ten Media Day. And I don't want to rag on that too hard. I've talked about that enough. And he did kind of rectify it. I don't know if you saw this, Dustin, but I think at one of his practices, he had on a shirt that said "We're in LA," and I can get on board with him embracing the screw up, because if you don't lean into that kind of thing, then what are you doing? But overall, these polls and lists and watch lists, whatever you want to look at heading into the season, none of it really means anything. I'm just ready to see both of these teams and really all of these Big Ten teams take the field for the first time. And with that being said, who do you kind of see finishing in the top two spots and playing for that first 18-team Big Ten Big Ten Conference Championship game?
Yeah, this is tough, because I think there's probably 3 teams, maybe 4, that I think will kind of be in that conversation. The 3 teams I think that will be in there are going to be Ohio State, Oregon, and Penn State. And I know Oregon and Ohio State play each other, so we could potentially have a rematch at the Big Ten championship game in December. The other team that really is intriguing to me would be USC, because I think offensively they're probably going to be good enough to be in that conversation, but their defense under Lincoln Riley has been not good. They weren't good at Oklahoma defensively, but they were good enough to win the Big 12 and to get into the college football playoff a couple times. So I think that if they made a change at defensive coordinator, I think if they take a couple steps up on that side of the ball, then maybe they're in that conversation. I don't think they'll be in the top 2. I think it's probably going to be Ohio State and Oregon. That's just my feel. I hate to go, with chalk there, but that's kind of my feel.
In college football, I feel like more often than not, chalk is kind of the way to go. And some people dislike that, but that's kind of the way it is sometimes.
It is. But I think those 2 teams, there's another team that people have been talking a lot. Rutgers may not be in that top 2 conversation, but they could be a top 5 team, because you look at their schedule.
What has gone on with Rutgers? And I hate to sound ignorant, but as somebody who doesn't normally follow Rutgers football and normally associates them with the bottom of the barrel of the Big Ten, what have they done to kind of put themselves in a position to be not necessarily a contender, but maybe in that next tier?
Well, the big thing is they got Kyle Monangai back, he was the Big Ten's leading rusher a season ago. I was at the NFL scouting combine, and we talked to a lot of former Big Ten players, defensive players, and asked who was the toughest offensive player that you went against during your time in the Big Ten. And a lot of them said Kyle Monangai. So he's a really hard-nosed runner. I think he'll be at the top of the Big Ten in the rushing category again this season. They went out and they got Ethan Kaliakmanis, the former Minnesota starter, brought him in at quarterback, and he's not going to be like a Bo Nix, Michael Penix, Hudson Card type quarterback, but can he move the ball through the air and find his targets? Yeah, he's probably better than what Rutgers has had in a while. They got 4 returning offensive linemen, I think 8 defensive starters, if I'm not wrong. So, and the big thing again is you look at their schedule, they don't have to play Ohio State. They don't have to play Oregon. I think they miss Penn State. I think they miss the top 3 teams. They don't have to play Iowa. So I think the highest ranked team that they'll play is USC and maybe Michigan in there. I think Michigan's on their schedule. So there's a couple tough teams, but you look at it, this is a team that could win 8 or 9 games. I mean, I think they have the talent to do that. And finally, they're not burdened by the shackles of the Big Ten East, right? So they benefited from that. I know Indiana would probably look at that Rutgers schedule and be like, yeah, can we get that, please? next season,
I'm
maybe.
not gonna lie. I do feel like Indiana was given a lot of favors on this schedule, even though I mean, you could have avoided Michigan and Ohio State and that type of thing, but to only have to go out to UCLA on the West Coast, you avoid USC and Oregon. You get Washington at home, and it's not going to be the same Washington led by Kalen DeBoer anymore. I do think that there were some favors given, maybe probably not intentionally, to Indiana, but yeah, Rutgers definitely probably won the scheduling jackpot when it comes to all of the 18 teams that are now in the Big Ten. One more thing before we wrap this segment up, Dustin. Did you see the newly named Pitbull Stadium? The obviously rapper / singer, whatever you want to refer to him as. He donated a significant amount of money to Florida International University to have the naming rights to their football stadium for, I believe, the next 4 to 5 years. And it's the first time I think we've ever seen the naming rights go to an individual human being and not a company or,
Yeah.
Actually, that's not 100% true because we have Simon Scott Assembly Hall, but I guess to like a celebrity, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. Dale. Right.
Dale.
That's what everybody's gonna be saying. So here was the thing that stood out to me. I'm not super surprised that we saw something like that happen, but I know it's FIU, so they will take any amount of money. But isn't it like $1.2 million? Like, I feel like that's super cheap.
Yeah, well, yeah, of course. And I guess
And again,
significant relative to like what I could afford is what I'm thinking of. It's
well,
not
yeah,
like
sure.
a massive multi-million-dollar donation per year type of thing.
Right, and usually those are, probably in the tens of millions. I don't know what
Yeah.
the contracts look like for a lot of those places, but I'm guessing 1.2 million is about as cheap as you could ever name any sort of stadium or complex. But again, I know it's FIU. The name will probably, if he's there, I'm sure they'll probably bring in more fans than they have in the past. Like in today's era, you got to get creative, and so kudos to FIU for, doing something that would resonate with fans. It's a local celebrity. He loves Miami, so more power to him. I thought it was funny, but it was also pretty cool.
And he's going to have the ability to utilize the stadium 10 days out of the year for whatever he wants, concerts, a festival, whatever it may be. And that that stadium holds 20,000 seats plus whatever I guess you have on the field. So that's a good amount to bring in for whatever concert or festival you plan on putting together. So I'm sure it's going to end up being a good investment for Pitbull himself. I'm sure he has his own plans on what he's going to utilize it for, and I'm sure he'll make money from this in some way, shape, or form.
I don't know what's in the contract, obviously, but if I was at FIU, I think I would have put in there however many home games we have, you have to perform at 2 of them as like the halftime show. Like we need people to come to these games. Please perform at halftime twice. Just that's all we're asking.
And I bet you'll see that happen at least once. And maybe it won't happen at all. I don't get why it wouldn't, but if you're going to pay to have the naming rights and you kind of want to let people know that, hey, this is Pitbull Stadium. I am Mr. Worldwide, Mr. 305, whatever he refers to himself as nowadays. Do a halftime show. Do it for homecoming. Do something fun.
Yeah, I would think. Yeah, I was going to say I think for the season opener, they would want to do something to just promote the heck out of it. I don't know that they will, but I don't know when their first game is. I don't know who it's against, but I would take advantage of that opportunity because you could probably bring in quite a few fans for, casual fans. I missed the word. Casual fans to the stadium to enjoy football game and a little Pitbull.
And he's going to be writing an FIU anthem as part of the deal as well. I don't know what that will sound like. I guess probably every other Pitbull song because they pretty much they're all about partying. They're all about Miami and they're all about having a good time. But
that's right.
It doesn't mean it can't be enjoyable music, I guess. Pitbull is kind of a guilty pleasure, if I'm being honest, on some occasions.
Oh, it's more than a guilty pleasure. Yeah, for sure. I listen to it. I don't want to say all the time because I don't, but like when you're in a good mood or you're like, I need to dance in my kitchen, you put on some Pitbull. You just go play Fireball, man.
Fireball. All right. Good stuff, Dustin. Good to have you on, and we'll definitely do this again once we get into the thick of things with college football season. But I appreciate you taking a few minutes this morning to chat with me and make your debut on In Touch with Indiana Sports, and I look forward to doing it again.
I look forward to it as well, and you're doing a great job. I know you're only a couple episodes in, but it's been awesome. So proud of you, and we'll do it again sometime.
Appreciate Dustin Schutte making his In Touch with Indiana sports debut, and appreciate his kind words he had to say at the end of that. Dustin and I have been pretty close over the last few years, getting to know each other through various different things that we have taken on together, and it's always a pleasure to do a segment with him, do a podcast with him, whatever it may be. So we will definitely be hearing from Mr. Schutte a lot more often. I want to dive a little more into this the Pit Bull Stadium stuff, because I think it's a combination of hilarity and also when you think of the serious side of it, like this may be something that we see a whole lot more of down the road in this new era of NIL and schools needing more money to help and is I'll just be blunt about it, pay for athletes, because if you're not paying for players in some way, shape, or form, I know purists hate hearing that, but that's how you succeed in college sports now, because now that it's legal, you have to do that because the players have all the power. And I don't want to get on my soapbox about that right now. I don't really have a lot of thoughts about it that haven't already been said, but that's where we are with college athletics. And it's cool to see Pitbull kind of be the first of his kind. I was just reading here. I know I mentioned first celebrity. To be specific, he's the first musician to have a stadium named after him. So Pitbull is going to pay the school $1.2 million per year for 5 years. And here's what he says. For me, what it boils down to is Miami's always known for being underdogs, no matter what we do and what level we take it to. Being underdogs is what I always felt about FIU, fighting, clawing their way to just be seen, to be recognized, whether it be from education, business, through sports. He also goes on to say, what we're doing here is groundbreaking. We're making history. This is history in the making. Just honestly, the reason I laugh is because it just sounds like could be and probably is lyrics from one of his songs. You're going to see that every other university is going to want to do the same thing. But the difference is we don't do this for propaganda. We do it from the heart. We do it because it's meaningful. We do it because I'm from the crib. I'm 305. I'm from the bottom. This is my backyard. Again, it sounds like he's already writing the FIU anthem as he speaks on this. So, and again, I mentioned earlier, he's going to create the anthem for FIU, or an anthem. I know it won't be like the school song necessarily, but here's part of other aspects of this deal that Pitbull has with FIU. He is required to post about the school on social media 12 times a year and appear at one athletics fundraising event per year throughout the term of the agreement. I mentioned this earlier with Dustin. Pitbull will get to use the stadium 10 days per year throughout the term of the deal, and the vodka company he owns will be the preferred brand distributed in the stadium. He'll also get 2 40-person suites for all home football games. And I mentioned the stadium capacity being 20,000. It really is the perfect venue size for festivals, concerts. It reminds me of what they do in Columbus it used to be called Rock on the Range. It's now been named Sonic Temple because they're under the umbrella of DWP, Danny Wimmer. But it's played in the Columbus Crew Soccer Stadium, which, again, not a huge stadium, similar to the likes of what is now Pitbull Stadium. So, so those 10 days, he's going to be able to use them 10 times out of the year. I'm curious. Will he create the Pitbull Festival? Will it be the Mr. Worldwide Festival, 305 Festival, whatever, maybe, because you see these music festivals popping up all over the country, some of them more successful than others, but I guarantee you see him utilize this one way or another in that extent. And I don't know to what success, but he clearly sees an opportunity for investment here, and I hope he succeeds. I mean, I know I'm not the biggest fan of Pitbull. I'm not a hater by any stretch of the imagination. As I mentioned with Dustin earlier, I think his music it can be considered a guilty pleasure for a lot of people. And I enjoy it from time to time. He has a lot of fun hit songs, if you want to call them that. But again, they all sound the same. But if you're in that right mood, that right mindset, it could be just what you need to brighten your day a little bit. I'm going to mute my microphone for just a moment as I get a cough out of my system. And I tell you what, I do think a lot of this, anytime I've done that a few times on this show while I've been recording, I think the allergies just, they get into the throat. They scratch you up a little bit. So Pitbull Stadium will be a thing. I'm sure you will see more of it. I don't know who will be next. I know there are several musicians out there that, are fans of certain teams. And let's just use Indiana as an example. It's like you have the John Mellencamp Pavilion. It's a practice facility at Indiana, but you may see something more like that where I'm not saying he's going to pay for naming rights to Memorial Stadium, but imagine if it was John Mellencamp Stadium. Or imagine if Guns N' Roses, Axl Rose, bought the naming rights to Ross-Ade Stadium at Purdue. I believe he's from West Lafayette or from the Lafayette area. It would be wild. I don't know if Axl Rose is a big Purdue fan, but you may see more of that in the future. You may see Drake. For some reason, Drake always comes to mind when this kind of stuff pops up. Used to be a big Kentucky fan. Drake is just a big fan of whoever's good. And so I don't know that he'll ever purchase rights to any specific team stadium. But, it's those types of things that I think about whenever I relate this to Pitbull. But so, yeah, shout out to Mr. Worldwide and his new endeavors. Let's get into a little bit of basketball talk. We haven't talked much basketball today. I want to address a comment that was made on Monday's podcast. It's from Larry. He said, "This podcast gives me hope that Mike Woodson may be fired soon. The fact that the school may actually expect him to win is good to hear." Let me start with this. I agree with the second thing you said. I do think it should be without a doubt that the school, no matter who the head coach is going to expect Indiana basketball to win at a high level. Now, the range of which the leash is, given slack, that depends. And with Mike Woodson being an alum, there are many people who think that there's a little more leeway for him. And I do think there's probably some truth to that to an extent. But I don't think a lot of people think that Mike Woodson, at least I think, maybe I'm wrong about this, but this is the kind of the sense I get. I feel like most people think that if Mike Woodson wasn't an alum, that he would have been fired at the end of last year. And that's just not the case. He had 2 good seasons. And I know when you think about the Indiana standard of being at the highest level and making it to Final Fours and that type of a thing, I know he didn't hit that level. But nothing was shown in the first 2 years that I feel like gave anybody a sense that he should be fired or that things were heading in the wrong direction. Bad seasons happen. And that's what last year was. It was a bad season. And and when I say, relatively speaking, it was bad, it wasn't the worst season of all time. It wasn't 4-28 like Louisville had in the first year of Kenny Payne or 8 and whatever it was last year in the second season. It wasn't astronomically horrible, but by the standards of Indiana, last year was a disappointing, bad year for the Hoosiers. And people have a right to be critical about that. Fans have a right to be critical. I just don't understand why it went straight to let's fire him that quickly. Now, as I mentioned with Alec the other day, I do think the way that Mike Woodson carried himself a little bit definitely showed some signs of, there might be some deeper issues here than I realized. And that's the way that he reacts when fans criticize him, because that's not going to fly. If you can't handle criticism from anybody, I don't care what school you're at or what program, franchise, whatever. If you can't handle criticism from the fans or from pundits, whoever it may be, you're just in the wrong line of work. It doesn't matter if you're an alum, doesn't matter if you played for the program you're coaching, whatever, you're still going to be held to whatever the standard is. And so I guess getting back to what Larry said, he said, this podcast gives me hope that Mike Woodson may be fired soon. And so again, I'm trying to read into this and figure out exactly what he's saying. Larry, feel free to send a follow-up on today's show if you're listening. But are you saying you hope that this team fails just so Mike Woodson can be fired? Because I don't see why anybody would want the athletes to not succeed simply because you dislike the coach. Because if Mike Woodson's up proving that he's not good enough, like that's one thing. But to not see what this upcoming team has put on the floor yet and immediately jump to, oh, I just hope he gets fired. I just don't see what that's based on. Again, that's why I encourage you to elaborate on that, Larry, if you choose to, because I just don't see the merit in just straight up saying, oh, well, I don't care what who this team has, whatever. I just want Mike Woodson gone, so I just want them to fail. And I know you don't outright say that you want them to fail in this comment, but that's just kind of what I'm feeling, I guess, from what you could be saying when you say this podcast gives me hope that Mike Woodson may be fired soon. So, because we didn't say that. We didn't say that outright the other day. We did mention that expectations are there. And with the roster that he's put together, there are going to be raised expectations this season. And if he doesn't deliver, I do think there is a good chance that he won't be the head coach moving forward if it's a season similar to last. Now, I guess I'll give a couple of examples. And I do believe Alec and I hit on both of these the other day, but I'll reiterate them in case anybody missed it. But I do think there's two things at least, and there's more than two, I'm sure, but there's two kind of ways to go about defining success for this year. I think Indiana could have a great regular season, finish in the top 2, maybe 3, and call that a successful season in the regular season. And then let's just say you get to the tournament and you bow out in the first or second round. Yeah, that's going to disappoint some fans because at some point, people are going to expect Mike Woodson to make a deep run. So, but here's the thing. I don't think that's fireable. If Indiana has a good year and contends for the Big Ten title, maybe even wins the Big Ten title, and fails to make a deep run in the NCAA tournament, that's not fireable. And people can disagree with me on that. There may come a time where that's a fireable offense, but not at the current state of where things are. Now, here's another thing. Let's just say Indiana has another up and down year, and they maybe get in the tournament as an 8 or a 9 seed. Obviously, fans are going to be antsy, and at that point, people are going to be expecting, okay, well, in order to salvage this, Mike Woodson needs to make a deep run in the NCAA tournament. And let's say they make a Sweet 16 run or maybe further as an 8 or a 9. That would be impressive, probably not expected, but that's also something kind of on the flip side of things that would kind of save Mike Woodson from having to, I guess, be let go or that type of a thing. If you miss the tournament, I don't see a scenario where Mike Woodson remains the head coach at the end of the 2024-2025 season. So that's kind of my thoughts on the different things that could play out. And I didn't even mention like the best of the best. Like, and I don't want to assume this will happen because it's just unlikely for any team really, unless you're maybe UConn. Just assume you have an amazing regular season and an amazing deep run. I don't want to jump to a conclusion and say that that's what's going to happen, but there's obviously the scenario where that is a possibility. I'm sure there's not a lot of believers in that. I'm not necessarily one of those believers either, but that's also something that could play out as well. So, yeah, there we go. I don't want to talk too much more about Mike Woodson and firing and stuff because that's all just kind of innuendo. There's obviously he's obviously going to be the head coach this year. So we will revisit that conversation down the road if necessary, but there's a lot of hope and expectation for Indiana basketball, I believe, right now going into 2024-25 with what's been put together on paper. And again, that's all it is, on paper. And we'll get a look at them in November whenever they take on their first few opponents. We won't learn a ton about them, similar to how we won't learn a ton about football in the first few opponents. But then they'll face South Carolina. You'll learn a little bit more. You'll go down to the Bahamas for the Battle for Atlantis, as we mentioned. And that's going to be your first true taste of what this team may be all about. So, and speaking of the Battle for Atlantis, let me go ahead and refresh this real quick to make sure nothing's been updated, at least at the time of this recording. There is a chance that this may change by the time that this podcast has been released. But less than 24 hours ago, the Battle for Atlantis Twitter account mentioned that the bracket announcement will be coming soon. And I know I kind of mentioned that myself over the course of the last few episodes, but I'm looking forward to seeing who Indiana draws, not only for their first game, but who they could potentially be playing in the second game, who they might play in the championship if they make it that far. Because again, it's a very loaded lineup of teams that depending on who you get matched up with, is a very good opportunity to get some marquee victories early on, and again, really set the table for the rest of the season for Indiana and for the rest of these programs. You got Arizona, Davidson, Gonzaga, Indiana, of course, Louisville, Oklahoma, Providence, and West Virginia. And I'll say this: don't sleep on Louisville. This Louisville team, so they just recently played in the Bahamas, similar to what Indiana did in Mike Woodson's first year, and they didn't play any world beaters by any stretch of the imagination, but they are going to be a high-powered offensive team under Pat Kelsey. It's not going to be the same Louisville team that you saw with Kenny Payne last year in Madison Square Garden, because it's literally an entire new roster. There's not a single guy on Louisville's roster from last year, the last two teams at all. So if Indiana ends up getting matched up with Louisville, fans should not expect to walk all over this team. There's probably going to be a sector of people that don't realize the changes that have been made, like all of them with Louisville. They may realize Kenny Payne's gone, but they may not realize to what extent things have changed. So I don't think, other than maybe Davidson, they're probably the only team that you should beat. Maybe West Virginia as well. I don't think West Virginia had too good of a season last year. I know they have a brand new head coach as well. Don't know too much about what they have personnel-wise. But outside of Davidson and West Virginia, anyone you play between Arizona, Gonzaga, Louisville, Oklahoma, and Providence, I think would be a really good matchup for Indiana. And Davidson and West Virginia could be good matchups too, especially when you're considering you're playing three of these teams 3 days in a row. It may be nice to kind of start off with a win. So maybe getting Davidson or West Virginia first, maybe a good way to get the ball rolling before you play the likes of the Arizonas or the Gonzagas of the world. So looking forward to whenever the Battle for Atlantis finally announces their bracket and who these matchups will be. So these will take place November 27th through 29th. I believe that's Thanksgiving weekend. So looking forward to that. This will be Indiana's first time playing in the Battle for Atlantis. I know a lot of people I feel like Indiana traditionally, when they're going into these multi-team events, it's usually the Miami Invitational. I think that's what they still call it. Yeah, the Maui Invitational, or as I used to call it, the Bill Walton Invitational. May he rest in peace, of course. But I'll say this: I will miss Bill Walton's commentary, and of course the reason I call or jokingly call the Maui Invitational the Bill Walton Invitational is because he's known for calling the games down there. He doesn't do every single one of them, but you get the Bill Walton antics, and I will definitely miss those antics this year. I think when we get to the Maui Invitational, once that time of year comes, I may find a couple of highlight clips, commentary clips to play in remembrance of good old Bill Walton behind the microphone. So yeah, looking forward to that and the rest of Indiana basketball, of course. And let's see how much time we got here. We'll wrap this thing up here momentarily. I do want to I want to go over one more thing, and it's just a quick little hitter here. And that is the way too early TBT 2025 favorites. So yeah, the TBT just ended. I know I mentioned Carmen's crew, the Ohio State alum. They were the champions of this year's edition, but the TBT Twitter account put out their way too early favorites, and they listed the top 10 teams that they expect to participate in next year's tournament. So I'll go from 1 to 10. Number 1 is the reigning champs, Carmen's crew, Ohio State. Number 2, La Familia from Kentucky. Number 3, Forever Cougs from Houston. Number 4, the Ville, of course, Louisville. Number 5, Eberline Drive, the team that took out Assembly Ball. Number 6, Happy Valley Hoopers from Penn State. I didn't realize Penn State's TBT team was that good. I know they made a deep run this year, but I didn't realize that they had that much talent to be listed in these favorites. Number 7, Mass Street, Kansas. Number 8, Stars of Stores of UConn. And number 9, Assembly Ball, of course, the Indiana Hoosiers alumni team. And number 10, the Aftershocks of Wichita State. I'd like to see Indiana bump up a little higher, because I do think if Indiana and Assembly Ball would have been a little more healthy during the tournament, I think they could have. I mean, they had a chance to beat Eberline Drive anyway. Eberline Drive couldn't get through the Elam ending. They were struggling. Indiana had them on the ropes, or I should say Assembly Ball. So I don't think there's any excuse if Assembly Ball is healthy next year, if you bring in a lot of the same guys and maybe a couple of others, I think they should make a run to maybe the Final Four, if you will, of the TBT. So looking forward to that next year. So with that being said, I'm going to go and wrap up today's episode of In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by HoosierIllustrated.com. Good show today. I felt very loose coming into this. Well, actually, let me say this. I didn't feel loose coming into the episode. I was actually feeling a lot more nervous than usual for whatever reason, but I'm definitely getting a lot more comfortable just kind of being myself and having a good time with this. And I don't mean to be corny as I take us out, but I'm just excited with where this is going. I'm having fun. I'm ready for college football to start, and I'm ready to keep on seeing what this turns into. Again, as always, shout out to HoosierIllustrated.com. Check out everything they've got going on their website. On the YouTube side of things, be sure to subscribe. Again, leave a like on the episode if you enjoyed it. Leave a comment on anything I may have mentioned today. And feel free to share the show as well. And I'm looking forward to doing this again on Friday. So until then, I will talk to you later on this week.